Hello, everyone. Welcome to Screenwalks. My name is Marco Demutis. I'm digital curator at Fotomuseum Winterthur in Switzerland. And together with John Uriarte, the Photographers Gallery in London, we have created this collaborative program of fortnightly live-streamed events. Through Screenwalks, we are interested in investigating the changing role of the photographic image in its networked and digital forms. Each event is led by an artist, researcher, or a curator, in this case, two curators, who takes the audience to the space where their core practices take place. Screenwalks can be a live performance, a peek behind the scenes of an artwork, or a guided online tour, among other possible formats. We have hosted now more than 50 Screenwalk events so far, and you can find video recordings of each one of them on our website and on our YouTube channel. If you have found Screenwalks useful for your professional or personal interests, do consider subscribing to Folders. For €7 a month, you'll support the program and its artists, and also get your personalized folder on folders.screenwalks.com. There you'll receive files and extra content from the artists and researchers of Screenwalks. Now, some housekeeping information. Your microphone should be muted to avoid noise disturbances, and if it's still on, please mute it now. We are recording and we'll be archiving this event. Please use the public chat to ask questions, or feel free to send a private message to John or me in Zoom, and we'll bring them to Pete and Elliot at the end of the event.
Hello from my side too. I'm John Uriarte, curator of the digital programs at the Photographers Gallery here in London. Today, we will be looking into online curatorial practices, which feels close to what we also try to do here on Screenwalks. Peter Areola Burns and Elliot Burns will be sharing Offsite Project with us, an independent program that they started together 5 years ago. During this time, their practice has spanned among many different platforms and strategies, including homepage exhibitions, gift shows, Google Maps residencies, or 3D video essays, among many others. Today, we'll have the chance to hear from a duo of curators who have been independently curating a very fertile alternative online program featuring digital artists coming from different parts of the world. We will be learning about the ideas that lay beneath their exhibitions and various projects, exploring notions related to the publication and circulation of network images, as well as about their online audiences. We have asked them to pick 5 projects that could somehow help us to better understand their 5 years of practice, and we are very excited to hear about them tonight. Offsite Project is an online curatorial platform, as I said, founded by Peter Areola Burns and Elliot Burns in 2017. Through partnerships, Offsite Project has created exhibitions and projects with Anonymous Gallery, the Austrian Cultural Forum London, Distant Gallery, Electric Artifacts, Industria, ISDSIT, and the Summer Works Festival. On the subject of online art ecosystems, they have been invited to speak on Centre St. Martin's, Centro de Cultura Digital, the CSNI, the DRHA Conference, Goldsmiths University, Modern Art, Oxford, the RCA, Somerset House Studios, and many other places in which they will need to ask Screenwalks now too. Peter Areola Burns is curator of digital art at the V&A. Through her role in the museum, she has generated projects to produce new knowledge around historical artworks from the digital art collection and links between pioneer and emerging generations of digital artists. Previously, she has held positions with Further Gallery and had a career in cultural PR and communications. And Elliot Burns is a lecturer in digital cultures at Centre St. Martin's. Recently, he had coordinated an R&D project for the British Council, exploring visions of majority word-oriented user interface online collection design, and with IAM has investigated compound disadvantages in the cultural and creative industry sector, informing the creation of the WeTransfer Supporting ACT Foundation. So with no further ado, Elliot and Peter, we are very excited to have you here. Well, I mean, you've been here sometimes before, but now as like leading guests. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. The screen is yours.
Thank you so much for having us. And also thank you to everyone that joined in tonight. It's very nice to see some familiar faces. I think you have already mentioned that Elliot and I started Offsite Project in 2017, and the gallery And curatorial platform initially was showing work through homepage exhibitions, but through the years we have developed the program into downloadable zip shows and Google Maps residencies. And this, we usually see this as, if you want to see it as a physical space, we will have the main exhibition space in the front, and then the artist residency room where we can develop different projects with the artists. And also the downloadable zip shows is more like a project room where people can, we're not gonna cover like those projects unfortunately tonight, but in the downloadable zip shows, you can download the content directly into your computer and interact with it, kind of interpret the exhibition as you would like. Yeah, and we have like some here, like some examples. And they are like programmed very differently. So the architecture like really changes from project to project. An offsite project is mainly an interactive platform. So in reality, you will never come and just watch something. That you actually have to interact with the content and the activities. We see the space almost like as a multimedia installation site where people come to interact with the work.
So just a couple of words before we kind of kick off in the kind of the main part of the talk. So as John was saying, we're going to attempt to cover 5 sort of curatorial ideas that have emerged out of 5 years of practice and can be sort of related back to one project in particular, but really come out of a wider, out of multiple projects and experiences, but we're kind of tethering them back to a singular activity. Because our archive of kind of content and production exists over multiple computers that we've been working on over different years, and hard drives and Google Drives. We've done a bit of sort of kind of archaeological recomposition of that archive into a set of folders, which you see here. So we're going to be going through those, opening up some web URLs and going through some of the sort of material that has accrued in the production of those projects. And just kind of give a little outline of the 5 areas that we're going to be addressing is hijacking the interface, incongruous aesthetic remixes, everyday art intersection, canonizing new media, and reveal DigiPublic's politics. So we're going to try our best to go through each of those in relationship to one specific project, going for about 8 minutes at most per area. So wish us luck with that. I'll hand back over to Peter for the first section.
Yeah, so mainly from hijacking the interface, we were thinking about the distrust that people have on new media technology, and it has existed for a long time, almost since cybernetics were founded as a field. So part of this tension that we have with technologies that were created in a military setting, and then they were applied into like social context and like brought into the home after the Second World War, really affect the way we consider them, and then the way they challenge us as a society and also as humans. So people have like really distrust them since they have been like living with them, but because of the things that they bring into our lives in terms of commodities, we end up accepting them, and we end up just like living with this distrust and kind of learning from it. And this is something that we can see like really evolving from early internet practices, where things become interconnected, and then evolve into a surveillance capitalism time in the 2000s. And we see like through all of this like span of like 60, 70 years, how people have started like creating different rituals or strategies to combat technology or to fight their phones or their computers, and like kind of hacking a culture really comes into terms with it, into like showing how really like infrastructure works and technology works for governments, but also how social structures are like confirmed by very few people in Silicon Valley, and this is like why we're trying to kind of hijack the interface or hijack how people look into their everyday life in the computer. And you can see that with these two examples of homepage exhibitions that we developed in 2020. I'm going to open this one. Let me. Coming to the video. So we also have, it's also maybe good to mention that we have had a little bit of trouble in archiving the website, because the homepage exhibitions are just available on view, like during the time that the exhibition is open on your browser. So once they're closed, and we took that decision because of the memory that it requires to just store all of this data and the images and all of the things that are running in the shows. So it's for practical reasons, but also because we prefer for people to enjoy the exhibition for a set period of time and then move on, because there's also something to say about things being considered permanent in an online space, and also like the fact that we take them for granted, like we don't really pay attention to them. So we prefer to have them out for 4 or 6 months and then we just like take them off. But because of the archiving process has changed so much, even in the last 5 years, we did some videos. We also did some documentation to Conifer, and that's why you will see like some bumpiness like going to the archive. So yeah, I was like mentioning this. Let me just make sure it doesn't have some. Yeah, this is the show Screensaver Watching You that we opened in spring in 2020, that has the work of Sasha Anikina, Sarah Dorat, Rachel McRae, Sarah Friend, Kellyanne Gardner, Tamara Kamitani, Joshi Kamitani, and Simon Brecker. And these artists are really showing the glitches in the systems, or they're trying to give a cue into users on how technology breaks. Like nothing is perfect, and as I was saying, like everything has fragilities or has its limitations, and it's kind of inviting the user to see like different things. And most of this theme was based on a lot of like pop culture in the 80s that was like pointing to the fact that we should watch out for media, and the media was haunting us. Like so yeah, like we can see like in some of the design, like we were trying to create this psychology of like something being really wrong with your computer. So we really like work. Let me go back. We have like 3 computers up as usual when we're working. Let me go back. So yeah, like this is how we usually will see like all of these icons in our computer. And we created GIFs that really give that sense of things being on terror or something taking over your personal space, which happens in everyday life, but then we decide to look away and like not to really like confront this. So we were trying to make people confront the idea of like these things were happening and are still like happening. Let me see if I can move back to the individual works. Maybe I'll do it here in the video. But I'm gonna just talk about the work of 4 different artists from the show, because of the time I cannot talk about everyone's work. But we are looking here at the work of Simon Brecker, who created this work called Google Maps Hacks in 2020, where he took 99 iPhones from eBay and like different secondhand shops and tuned them on into Google Maps and took the trolley around Berlin. So he was like creating, if you were looking into maps, you will see that the city was jammed and there was like a lot of traffic, and Google Maps was rerouting users to different sites. So we can see here how the artist is showing, like the problematics of the online and the physical. And then I think what is very fun of these projects is that they are also showing how you can take over the tools or the means of production. And it's not just like letting you into this state where you feel, like you're trapped in this horror story, but you actually can activate something, or you can change things. And we also have here the work of Tamara Kametani, the Sea State Count for 180 miles from 2017, where we're looking at this render version of Google Earth that is software that usually is considered to play real-time simulations for those that haven't interacted with it. And it's creating real-time simulations of Google Maps. So she's showing an area where between Syria and Italy, where we have a lot of migration and refugees crossing the borders. But we can see how, like Google Maps is invisibilizing like people through that. And now I'm gonna go, just thinking about the time, I'm gonna go to the second project. Let me see. Sorry. And then we have this show, Blue Screen of Death, that we worked with Kara Chin to create. Again, like Kara Chin is thinking about how technology is been haunting us, and kind of the spirit of inanimate objects, and that human thing that we have in like looking into recognizing objects and like trying to look into putting eyes to things and things that are inanimate. And she's looking specifically into Sukumukami, that is part of the Japanese folklore, that once an object has a life, if it has a very good life, it's going to be a good spirit, but if it has a very bad life, it's going to be a very bad spirit after it has been used. So objects always have spirits, and they're haunted or cursed depending on how you're being treated. And it speaks a lot about how we treat our phones and computers. So the show creates a shrine where you can come and speak with all of the spirits from the different computers and phones and appliances that you have. And Kara created like this Ouija board with all of these gifts. Like once you were navigating the Ouija board, you can see the gifts opening up. Let me go back to it. Yeah, I'll extend it a little bit. Let me see. And aesthetically, she was also thinking about how companies have been designing these products and kind of trying to erase these borders between the human and the machine. And we see more like even with our headphones, like the cords are disappearing, with the phone, like the keyboard is disappearing. So she's like pointing out into all of these elements. And the show also had some really nice hidden eggs. Like, for example, when you click in some of the keys, you will come across into the design integrated. And then I'm gonna pass it to you because I'm really
okay. Yeah, this is us trying to like keep good timekeeping and get through quite a lot of content in a relatively tight time frame. So the second section that we're going to look at is going to be what we're going to be calling incongruous aesthetic remixes, and this can be sort of understood as the sort of divergence of image aesthetics and behaviors that we witness in internet spaces. And that dates back to the 1990s, maybe particularly kind of becomes prominent in the early days of kind of user-generated websites, GeoCity type sites, but can be understood in a contemporaneous way as well. And what we kind of witness online with aesthetics that sort of buttress and exist alongside each other, but are extremely different and form this sort of polyaesthetic maximalism, is not an incohesion, but paradoxically a cohesion between them. The sort of internet space, the media systems sort of allow things that are very disparate to coexist quite comfortably. And it's almost, as we understand it, a return back to the sort of collaging techniques of the early 20th century, where different aesthetic materials could be brought and compressed together through the act of cutting and pasting, but facilitated through internet spaces as well as new media forms of art production. So this sort of combination of aesthetic forms is sort of representative both of the image networks created by the internet and the way that we rapidly shift between different aesthetic styles in our social media spaces, but equally is representative of the attention and cognitive changes that the internet has wrought onto users over kind of times inhabiting the space. To talk about this a bit, we're going to use the exhibition, The Terminal Human-Shaped Hole. See if I can find it here. So this was a show that was created or began creation back in 2019 with the artist Jason Isolini. So we approached Jason to discuss the idea of creating a 360 film / group show, and to see if we could work together to bring that to life. And over about a year and a half, we moved forward with the project, bringing in a number of artists, 10 artists in total. So that included Bob Bicknell-Knight, Ian Bruner, Joshua Citarella, Jessica Evans, James Irwin, Claire Javert, Kakia Konstanaki, Angeline Metzler, Erin Mitchell, and Neil Willis. And eventually this show was exhibited at an anonymous gallery in New York in 2021 in the spring. And I'm just going to kind of bring up the actual video work itself. So this is what the result of the project was. Yeah, let me drop the volume down for us. So when this was initially conceived, it would be the intention that visitors would experience it through VR headsets. But of course, the project launched during COVID, meaning that we had to kind of host it, as you'll see over here, in an equirectangular, in a geodesic dome, or half a geodesic dome that was projecting the forward part of the 360 film. But as you'll see, as the kind of film progresses onwards, we go through different kind of image qualities, from 3D captured real world locations to those locations being heavily distorted, as well as locations that have been downloaded from the internet from people who filmed in 3D and produced there, and then sort of fractally remixed. So this is what we mean by this sort of kind of like pushing the aesthetic envelope, making things quite incongruous. Here you see a work by the artist Neil Willis, which is then kind of superimposed in the image sphere space. As the movie progresses, and I'll skip it forward a little bit, let's see if this loads, you get other moments of kind of extreme kind of composition and aesthetics being barraged together, but the totality of the exhibition space, the 360 film kind of very smoothly compresses that together. This is some of the work by Ian Bruner, where 3D objects have been imported into the space as well, and the camera is rotating around that object.
I thought it was going to be a little big, but actually the bag fits perfectly. I got a lot of compliments the first time I used it, and it's going into my bag for my first backpacking. Do you actually need this bag?
An address, according to the coordinate. Searching the best deals for 46 degrees.
This is possibly one of the more sort of aesthetically maximalist and incongruous scenes, where there's a huge sort of level of textural differences coexisting in a singular tight packed space. I also should say this sort of kind of like aesthetic pushing of the envelope is quite common within Jason's work, which often kind of really bring a mixture of materials together and try to resolve the tensions between them. But just to kind of step back and talk a little bit about this, the sort of like historical references that exist in this work. So this project owes sort of legacy to some works that were produced in the 1950s, in particular, Richard Hamilton's work, Just What Is It That Makes Today's Home So Different, So Appealing, which was the poster image for an exhibition in 1956 at the Whitechapel Gallery called This Is Tomorrow. So the exhibition This Is Tomorrow was constructed by Theo Crosby, an art critic and architect who, working with the independent group, devised an idea to bring together 38 participants and divide them into 12 teams of 4 or roughly 3s or 4s, with architects, designers, artists and theorists composing each team. So here's a team with Paolozzi, Smithson, Henderson, and well, another Smithson. They were husband and wife. So those sort of compositions, and this created this these unique artworks that were bringing together multiple ideas and aesthetics and forms into one hybridized space or a set of hybridized installations. And that's the sort of ideology that was behind this work, but is also something that we're trying to, or have tried to, push forward in the project The Terminal, by creating an aesthetic space that merges the practices of 11 artists or 10 artists, and then uses one artist's sort of directorial talent to bring those together. And this is something that I think we can kind of see being increasingly common in some of the online exhibition spaces, a maximalist way of working with aesthetics. Again, just conscious of time, I'm going to jump on to our next session, which is the idea of everyday art intersection. So what we mean by everyday art intersection is a sort of form of transmedia tactics. So transmedia methodologies is the idea of a project or a promotional strategy existing across multiple media spaces simultaneously and being sort of coordinated with one another. Though in an arts context, it can be kind of more easily understood as the artwork having multiple articulations in different spaces that the viewer may come across one of those spaces, or multiple ones, and those spaces may intersect with each other or exist within isolation. Our thinking around these spaces has grown to employ spaces that are not traditionally identified as artistic venues, and to think about using that to maximize the audience reach, and especially try to reach audiences that are unconditioned in regards to the artwork itself, the project, but also potentially not traditionally art-going audiences. Although sort of going is an odd term when you're thinking about internet practices, it's less about going than stumbling across or finding through browsing. By trying to reach out to those audiences, we've been thinking about creating more authentic interactions that are determined by the mediums themselves. And the project that we want to talk to you in regards to this is Vesalier, which was a project we produced with Leah Poré, also back in 2021, and surprisingly kind of releasing in the same month as the project with Jason. So I'm just going to see if this works. So Vesalier was a text-based adventure game, and it's built on a service called textadventure.co.uk, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. It's a really old system, and occasionally the servers go down because it looks like it's got a sort of small level of maintenance. Today, it does look like it's misbehaving and isn't showing us But what you would see if the website was nicely working and behaving for us would be something like this. So users would start on the homepage of Offsite Project and click through. A pop-up window would launch, and you would receive the entry to a text-based adventure game, which was constructed a little bit in reference to The Legend of Zelda. So with Leah, we were thinking about a trans-historical narrative where the player assumes the role of the ghost of Louis XIV and travels through Louis's palace, moving between the bedchamber. What happened there?
It's just because of that. Yeah, copy the link and go to Chrome.
Okay, hang on, I've got it. Okay, we'll go with images for the moment because we seem to be having trouble there. So you can find the whole account online pretty easily if you go for Instagram @Vesalio. But basically, you would navigate from this first room and move through different spaces in the palace. So here we see the Hall of Mirrors, the Menagerie, the gardens, the orangery, the Golden Gate, a fountain, so on and so forth. Each space within inside the game world was constructed almost like its own narrative dungeon, so self-contained, allowing the user to work within that space. So already here to play the game, we have the homepage Offsite Project as the launch pad for it, textadventure.co.uk as the host of the exhibition, and the map being served up, facilitated by an Instagram feed. For a little bit of context, throughout the game, you would come across spaces like this. Let me grab these together. So these are the design builds that Leah sent over and was showing us. So you see the sort of world being built. So you'd come across images extracted from Unity, where Leah had been constructing different 3D environments that represented the different spaces, but the main experience was conveyed through text and text options. And just for some context on that, you can see very quickly here kind of the Miro planning board that we were using to arrange all of this content together. So this is the arrangement of the rooms, and the stars represent whether or not you could find specific runes that you needed to collect in the game. Up here, we have some of the sort of plausible routes we were designing for how the text structure could exist. So we had to kind of work out what would be playable or simple enough routes for people to kind of work their way through them. Fortunately, there's a little bit actually of the full Instagram feed, and you can see how we were planning that as well, creating notes across it in Miro. And then finally, this is actually what the planning of the text game looked like. So lots of post-it notes to develop and design that and see how it was working. Anyway, so there are 3 spaces operating publicly at this stage: homepage, the game, and the Instagram account. But to that, we added a 4th. So Leah had previously worked on a project with Virginia Bianchi Gallery, who had published. So Leah had previously worked with Virginia Bianchi Gallery to create a project, and they had worked to create a Giphy account to go alongside that. Is that behaving now? Cool. So in that same vein, we worked with Leah to produce an account on Giphy for Offsite Project and get that registered and officiated. And Leah created a set of GIFs, these sort of isometric pixel drawing works that accompanied, were found inside the text-based adventure, but could also be found online surreptitiously and unexpectedly. So the game itself has somewhere around, I think, about 500 plays to date, so not an unreasonable amount for a text-based adventure. But the Giphy has, by the virtue that it is linked over to Instagram, so if you go on an Instagram story and look to plug a GIF into that story, you will be able to kind of pull off accounts that have published in Giphy. It's now got 21.2 million collective views between the different GIFs, 39 in total. So that ranges from some of the GIFs that have much less. So only, that's 16 million. Oh, wow, that's the most. Okay, I was thinking because at the bottom it might be stacked for less. Okay, so this one ended up with 16 million views by some reason. So if you look at the tags, so when uploading these, Leah was putting in tags: video games, castle, medieval, royals, palace, Louis XIV, Leah Porre, Vasalier. Choose your own adventure as an acronym, possibly not going to be so commonly searched for by the average Instagram user. Offsite project, Palace of Versailles, 3D world building. So some of these terms may be terms that people would kind of regularly use. And we're not sure if use means use or views just means it's come up in someone's context, but this is, for this one artwork, 16 million people have visited it. And if they were searching for video game castles, they may also get image results like this. So it would appear in a context of these other examples of castles and royalty. And this opens up this kind of really interesting potential in curation, where you're accepting that a lot of your created material, the artist's creative material, only 334,000 views for this work, is going to be witnessed by people, but not in the context of being an artwork or in relationship to the project itself. So chances are the vast majority of people who have come across these works will never know that it was part of an exhibition. We'll never know who the artist was or who we were and what our relationship to these digital assets, these artworks are. They will be using it in ways equally that we have no idea about. So these images, if you've got, you know, over 250,000 views, you can assume some level of that has been used. Even 1 in 100 is going to be, you know, 3.3 thousand uses of that artwork in Instagram stories. So when we talk about everyday art intersection, we're really thinking about what are the venues that exist online that can be employed by curators and artists to extend the reach of their work, but thinking about that in a way that isn't necessarily about garnering a huge return, but sort of playfully exploiting the metrics and scale of the internet without trying to kind of promote the work so heavily, kind of loosening it from the project as well at the same time. Okay, I'll pass back to Peter for our fourth section and close down some of these tabs.
Yeah, so the first section is canonizing new media, where we're trying to link digital art practices with more extended artistic practices. And we also refer into things that are outside of the art world as well. So let me go into the folder. Let's see if it likes it, because it's going to start down a little bit. So this year, Constant Dullard and Nina Lisson from Distant Gallery invited us to curate a show for the gallery, and this is just how the gallery looks once you're entering. You have to enter your username and then agree with the privacy statement, and then it will also ask you if you want to turn on your microphone and your camera, and you have to accept if you want the whole experience, but you also like go far away from it. Yeah, so the platform is quite interesting because it brings back that social value of gallery spaces, or how gallery spaces are used by artists as places to come together. And you can point like more on the side corner, but you once you have multiple users, you will see like all of the different dots appearing, and you can like see other people looking at works. And once you approach them, and you will see like your face like turning into an egg around the show. And you can actually speak with people that you will do in a physical space. So you can have a conversation about the work or about something else, or about art. So it's a very nice space to come together with people, and that actually like seeing ourselves reflected in the camera and coming to meet Nina and Constant there, it made us realize that we want to work with the camera element of the gallery, and especially with augmented reality face filters. And to work with face filters, we were considering what's the wider context where like face filters emerge from, because they're not just a new technology. Like face filters conceptually have existed within augmented reality, have existed for a long time. And for that, we went back into VDR from the 70s, and we have. Let me see that volume. But yeah, we have this work by Anthony Vito from 1971, where is one of the first video works from the 70s, where artists are really engaging with the camera and like the gaze of the audience through it. And one of the main critiques during this time, it was that VDR was quite narcissistic, and especially with a lot of like female practitioners start like taking over the medium, it was even more heavily criticized. Yeah, we have like this piece by Linda Benglins now from 1973. But yeah, like the commonality of the medium is that we will, artists will be playing with self-representation and like really exploring the notion of the self and kind of the programming on the self. And you can see that going more into this work from 1994, Seduction of a Cyborg by Lynn Hirschman-Leeson. So in reality, these artists are not interested in just showcasing their bodies, but actually like make a commentary of how they are seen to engaging with technology and with a wider audience. I like that. This is not. Let me see if I can get into this. Scenes. Well, yeah, we have this scene of the main character being in a almost like plastic surgery clinic, but then instead of having plastic surgery, like she's being programmed by a scientist. But I'm gonna pass back into.
You might have this other one open, which running.
Oh yeah, it's running. There you go. But I'm just gonna. And then we also found, like doing the research, this collaborative piece by Nancy Holt and Richard Serra, that is not only thinking about image, but the notion of time in like using technology.
The words are coming back on top of me.
So at this point, it's not just about self-representation, but also what having that simulation of the self in the digital actually psychologically produces on you. And in this piece, yeah, like Nancy Holt is delivering some audio and having a relay, and just that little effect is actually having a big impact on her way of like perceiving herself and her body.
The words coming back.
Yeah. So yeah, like we came back into these references and also into literature, and we tried to root it into the myth of Narcissus. And yeah, one thing that is very peculiar is like Narcissus was initially identified like a male, and psychologists in the late 1800s and early 1900s, like people like Freud, changed the the sense from narcissism from being male to female, and having that sense of obsession with oneself, when in reality Narcissus was kind of perceiving its image as like something alien, and that's why it was like so attracted to the image, because it thought it was another being, but at the same time it recognized that other being as being itself. So in the exhibition, we invited different artists to participate that have more augmented reality face filter practices and like webcam works, people like artists like Inesh Alpha, Barhar Baines, Xian Fan, Huntress Janos, Kaiken, Panta X-Ray, T.I. Revu, and Kian Kian Ye, and webcam artists like Petra Kodrait and Molly Soda, who since very early on have been working with network practices and more thinking about documenting the self in using the camera, and yeah, like we also have the work of Maya Man, who produced this downloadable experience where you actually can download the extendable Chrome, and every time you log into Chrome, like it will take like just like a photo of you. So it's very similar to the app like Be Real, like it's trying to demonstrate more like the everyday use of photography. So it's very nice, again, like when you go back into these personal archives that most of the times like we ignore. And one thing that is quite nice is like you can download Maya Man's work, and also once you scan like the QR codes, you can interact with the augmented reality face filters as you go. Yeah, I'm gonna pass it to you. Yeah.
So that was our work on trying to create a new canon of art history. I'll close that because it takes a little bit of like quite a lot of, yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, so coming on to the sort of final section that we want to talk about, and that is to reveal the DigiPublics politics, the politics of digital public spaces. And what we sort of mean by that idea is to recognizing the underlying authority that exists inside digital spaces or pseudo public spaces, corporate publics basically, and how those spaces have been conditioned to shape audiences' behaviors as well as normalize expectations, and from that to lead to a level of dependency on those publics, on those services. This is kind of relatable to the writing of Gert Levink when he talks about the social in social media. And by kind of creating practices or allowing opportunities for practices where those relationships can be exposed through artistic interventions, there's some potential to begin sort of critically challenge them. In our case, this takes place quite actively within inside the Google Maps residency that we run. So this was the third aspect of Offsite Project, which was added in mid-2018 and has to date run 17 different residencies because of the layer limits. So you'll see here on the left-hand side, where's my cursor? There we are. You'll see that there's actually a limit of the number of layers that can be created within inside the Google Maps of 10. So each Google Maps, custom Google Maps hosts 10 artist residency spaces effectively, which then kind of start layering and intersecting over each other. Sometimes these projects are research-based, and sometimes they're quite humorous and light-hearted. But more often than not, we find that artists working with inside Google Maps start tending towards quite political discussions, or discussions that really interrogate the use of the map and how that technology has become ubiquitous and changed our way of viewing and perceiving space. So in the first map, we had projects by people like Joseph Steele, who retraced their route through Syria. So each of the camera points there is a image, we might have a little bit of a loading problem, of Joseph traveling around Syria, northern Syria and Rojava, where the freedom fighters were fighting against the state and the train they controlled. Other projects I know, Juan Cavelli has been on Screenwalks to talk about his project Modern Ruin, which had a sort of political talk about the corruption in Colombia, but also kind of a really interesting one that took and extended these ideas of interrogating digital publics was a project by Jason Isolini, the artist we mentioned earlier in regards to Terminal, who created a series of works which were commenting upon the death of a woman called Elaine Herzberg, who was the first recorded death by an automated vehicle. It happened that an automated Uber was out for testing and struck Miss Herzberg, killing her, and there was a sort of ongoing court case by Uber. Interceding into the location of Herzberg's death, Jason created a series of installations directly into Google Street View that if you went through that particular street, you would find yourself coming face to face with these imposed images that created a sort of narrative regarding the event. So you could step through it and witness a sort of a reimagination or reinterpretation of what had happened. Unfortunately, nowadays, those installations as such don't exist in Google Maps anymore, because at a certain point, the project was covered by Vice magazines, the motherboard section. And because of that, a Google employee was alerted to what was happening and reported, and the work was taken down. So there was this sort of weird event going on. Firstly, how Uber had rallied to silence what had happened, the death, and tried to protect effectively their IP and their shares. And then how, as a knock-on effect of that, when that was commented upon in a sort of pseudo-public territory, Google themselves policed that action and removed those works. So this is why you see now when you go to those locations, not the actual work itself, you can only see it in this expanded, flattened form. It's kind of image form, but not its wrapped image. Switching on to the second round of Google Maps, there's another 7 that were created in the second wave, and so we're still running this map, and you can see again all the sort of work accumulated on top of each other. But we've had kind of relatively political projects that have run through that period. So Tamara Kamatani has used the Google Maps system as a way to look at the privacy invasive technologies that were released during COVID in different regions. So worked to collect together experiences of different communities around the world and news stories, and find out what technologies were being employed and rolled out, and maybe what sort of the implications of those were. The artist Angeline Metzler produced a series of works that were looking at the economics of the labor exchange programs in the Philippines, in particular relating that to Toronto, where a live work was taking place. But of particular interest, maybe for us today, to kind of explore the politicization of Google Maps as a space and reveal some of those events and conversations is a work by Taman Azam. So Taman looked into the practices of mapping Street View in Israel, and found out across that period of investigation that, let me bring up some images here on the computer so it's kind of easier to see. So wherever the Google Street View cars travel in Israel, they are directed by these cute green cars. these kind of seemingly innocuous vehicles that actually in truth are driven by two security agents, effectively monitoring where Google Street View can do, literally tethering them behind and saying you can only monitor and progress down these streets. The effect that this has in certain areas is to invisibilize communities, particularly sort of Palestinian communities that may exist. So areas that people are living in within Israel are becoming unmapped as a deliberate state policy that is managed in relationship to people. So this is a sort of another case example where these practices within Google Maps, these residency programs, have started to reveal quite complex problems with the form of public that is being pushed forward by tech companies and that have become really kind of standard. So offering an opportunity for giving artists to explore this space is slowly unpeeling just other ways that other dialogues, other discussions that are maybe hard to spot at first in relationship to into these publics. Okay. We'll stop sharing now. I think we did probably about 10 minutes per one in the end.
Thank you so much for sharing all the works while you were going through it, and especially with the last project, and you mentioned all this politics involved on the Google Maps residencies. I was wondering, also considering the time that you've been curating all these shows and projects, how do you feel that the internet has changed, especially for alternative curation projects such as yours? Like how, because you use your homepage in many projects, but you also use platforms that are already there and you try to sort of like exploit them somehow. So I guess that you have seen how the centralization of the internet has been happening throughout the years. And I was wondering, what's your experience with that?
I mean, if you were to look at it in relationship to the changes that are happening right now in terms of digital curation, there is a tendency towards 3D environmental exhibition design, which we're sort of part of the generation of online spaces that came up either custom coding websites or using platform, what you see is what you get builders. And it seems like for a lot of the new generation of artists and curators coming out, there is an expectation of 3D exhibition building, and of course some like amazingly fantastic things happening in spaces like Decentraland, Mozilla Hubs, so the corporate spaces, as well as places like New Art City, which is probably the kind of the biggest and best example of where those things are happening. So there's an expectation change, which I think is means that curators working in user interface sort of design techniques are having to probably push what they're doing a bit more. And that maybe is encouraging us to step out into more of those secondary, third spaces that we've some experience with.
I think also maybe some of the allowance that corporate spaces give you is the way that you can like reprogram them. So they're very accessible for people that don't know how to code, and then but want to express something and want to create something online. I think it's like a good medium. Like we see a lot of I think maybe during the pandemic, there were a lot of new exhibitions happening on Instagram, or like people trying to do different formattings, like using corporate platforms. And I think it's a good initial solution, but it's always good to reconsider how we can move away from them, or also how like those power dynamics in terms of ownership, and also about how the space is shaped. Like one of the main things that we have seen through the years is that custom coded platforms have become more cryptic in the way that you can edit them. So the more you update the platforms, the less you can edit. So the aesthetics become at a certain point like quite similar. And that's something like happens with like new operation systems, and the way that more automated things, algorithm run design abilities are programmed into like setups for coding websites.
But for example, on that point, we run our site through Cargo Collective, but the original Cargo Collective, and when Cargo 2 came out, they pushed pretty hard with lots of deals and discounts to get people to move over onto what is a flashier looking service, but one that doesn't allow as much custom coding to go on. And obviously anyone coming in to create an account on that now only has access to Cargo 2, never to Cargo 1. So we decided not to, just because it was going to be a lot of updating. But in the long term, that was the better choice for us, because it's given us access to a site that is still more customizable than the contemporary version is. And that's, as Peter says, that seems to be sort of an ongoing motion where, 20 years ago, you'd be building it from scratch. So you would really have to customize. We're in that gradual decline down to very set standards.
Thank you so much. And also, thanks a lot for being able to compress each year in 10 minutes. So that was quite a feat. And already we're very curious to know also, given all of this experience. I think personally, I'm of course very much a fan of your work, but I also can't stop thinking about these ideas of fragility that seems to be recurring, no? Like there is something about dealing with the very specificities of online and digital spaces that comes with this certain fragility. I think, Pete, at the beginning you were saying the archiving is kind of like a bit here and there. And now we're just talking about like the different version of Cargo and how they affect, what is possible. So I just wonder if this kind of allows, of course, a performative aspect, and then also this idea of exhibitions that ends. But do you think that it also prevents online spaces and digital curating from, extending into realms of more, to use the word, canonized form of arts, or like institutions? And maybe, I don't know if you also want to talk about your experience at the V&A compared to what you're doing with the collective, if there's like something to be said about these spaces being something that we can only address on this kind of temporary, small scale, non-institutional forms, or there's some hope also for other institutions to join these experiments.
I think in terms more in institutional relationships, there's always more governance. And I think from part of the institution and the corporations are still very much aware of how they want to be represented. And then maybe this is not about online curation, but within the section that I work, the design and digital section at the art, architecture, photography and design department at the V&A, we collect some of things like Google Maps recording unit, or an Amazon robot that goes around the warehouses. And we have these kind of items that runs more. I think the borders of the corporations are still more hard in terms of how we can represent them, how we can speak about it. And I guess with Offsite project, the fragility comes in terms of putting out there, supporting artists that is putting out there a commentary on how these corporations work and being erased immediately. So it comes more from an ongoing conversation with a big institution into actually targeting individuals and taking down the content or owning the content even more.
I think to add to the archiving processes and the fragility that's there, and as Peter's saying, if you work in a large institution and you're going to embark on a large web project, you invest time and resources into kind of thinking about longevity and documentation processes, whereas the vast majority of people who have created sort of pop-up or artist-led online galleries in the last years have not had that sort of opportunity to kind of sit and think or have boardroom discussions or run consultation. So places are created with varying protocols for preservation. We undermined ourselves a little bit by deciding that we would, between exhibitions, alter the CSS code that it was designed on. So it just meant that exhibition A became completely non-functional by the time you installed exhibition C, because you'd tinkered with the code and the whole thing looked just very bad. But this kind of like, it forces a condition, which is quite nice, which is not being obsessed with the permanence of online spaces. And this is some weird sort of archival Derridian fever dream that we've all bought into, that everything should be permanent. It's a little bit like the experience of when you accidentally close Chrome or Firefox or Safari. Yeah, Peter is in and out of existence as we're talking about this. And you lose all your tabs and it's gone, and it's the frustration, and it's something that we felt like, oh, that should always be there. So very early on, just allowing ourselves not to worry about that was a big relief. But looking back simultaneously, we should have kind of gone, how are we going to document this and do it with a bit of parity between shows? So we've probably updated our documentation systems, you know, once every 6 months or a year. So the actual output looks very, very different. The final thing I'll add on this is, though, if you look back into like art history, especially around performance art, there is often very scant documentation of some of the best performances or the seminal performances of the 1960s and 70s. You know, Chris Burden getting shot in the arm in a studio in LA, there's a handful of photos and that's enough. And then there's the mythology that built around people retelling that story. So I think we can start treating web spaces a little bit like that, that when they start to degrade, we don't panic. We allow that to be a sort of natural part of the process, and just use collective and shared communal memory to be the thing that carries forward what was important. That's especially true because looking back at online exhibitions 5 years ago, by the standard that exists now, it's kind of hard to appreciate them in real time. You need to have a little bit of the legacy sewn into it.
I was also wondering, well, I was hearing you and hearing all these ideas that I do agree, like this idea of an alternative organization that maybe is not so focused on archiving and documenting the works, but like of making them happen and like considering the option of not keeping them and the problems that come with it. But I was also wondering, as you've been like doing this with Offsat project for since 2017, what's your opinion on all the programs that started during the pandemic? Including us. ScreenWorks started on the first week of the lockdown in the UK. So what's the feeling that you got towards that? And also now that, at least in some areas of the world, or mainly we can say that the effects of the pandemics are going down, what remains of all the projects that different institutions started during that time in which most of the people was glued to the screens? Have like institutions made something out of it, or?
There was a conference that was screened online, and the director of MoMA, I think it was MoMA, or maybe the Met, don't quote me, was one of the headline chairs of the conference, and had lots and lots of slides about like how well they had done in terms of viewer figures during the pandemic. And that's all really true, but what was kind of the subtext was that the staff at the museum was having to continue doing that even though the museum was open. And you went, hang on, you guys were doing a lot to begin with, and now you're doing that plus maintaining a huge online output. And I guess, you know, for yourselves, you know, ScreenWalks has continued, and honestly should, because it's a great opportunity, and it's becoming this archive in itself of like really brilliant experiences and projects. Kind of links back to like you need good legacy, not good documentation, and this definitely fits into that gap. But the demand to create content really limited, and it felt like in the pandemic when people should have been resting, they were being pushed to generate new means of communication and stay culturally relevant. I think what ScreenWalks does in terms of like one thing every couple of weeks and a relatively kind of relaxed format is actually really useful because it's not super demanding on people to kind of explore through their systems. There was a gallery, Green Cube Gallery, based in Italy, an online gallery that in the pandemic kind of just put up a notice like you would like put a poster across the front of a shop saying, we're closed down for the next year or however long this is, we're not going to participate. And it was a really refreshing take that they were stepping out of the demand that was being created. And to an extent, I think we're still dealing with adjusting back to the hybrid demands of creating online content and maintaining institutions in the physical world.
I think there was also, I think I always get surprised about the lack of memory that we have collectively. Like it's very easy to forget things that have been done before, because with the pandemic, one of the main things where like museums are doing things for the first time, or this is happening, but there were a lot of programs that evolved like in the 90s, or like a lot of experimentation. Like for example, Mongrel was doing an experimental website with Tate that is like at some points, if you like really like try to look for it, you will find it, but it's like kind of glitch and on archive and like just like existing out there. But there were like many institutions like in the 90s like trying to create projects when it was kind of crazy to have a website for a museum, or like even like you see that every kind of couple of years, and now it's just speeding up, like where museums so like, oh, we don't need social media like that. Like that's not really what our audiences are for. And now like social media is an essential part of, or just like cultural organizations. And the pandemic really like makes you realize like how easy it is for people to forget, and probably is because of how online environments work and the flow of content online like works, that really the sense that we have of time and the perception have like really like shifted a lot, and especially with the pandemic where we have all of these different content just like freely flowing. And I guess like some places really like look for ways to engage in with their audiences, but like some other spaces just want to recreate a physical space to have that sense of ownership of like property online. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. There's also a question from the chat. I'm just gonna read for the ones on Twitch who cannot read it. Thank you both for your presentation. I get the idea about ephemerality, but one thing that I find difficult when I teach art history students about new media art, online art project, is the frequent inability to know whether the artwork is working correctly, whether you've seen the whole thing, and the confusing experience of what you refer to as maximal aesthetic at one point. Do you aim to confuse viewers an intentional part of your approach?
I think in some cases, like for example, in Screensaver Watching You, like which was one of the examples that we showed at the beginning, we were trying to create a sense of confusion, like people want to come and see our works, and it was like a very different experience of seeing your work. Or also with Google Maps, that is a platform that usually people use to put pins on their favorite shops or restaurants, or is more used to consume things. So I think it's not trying to confuse people, but like to create different ways of seeing things.
I mean, simultaneously with that show, the fact that we kind of used the desktop Mac interface to allow you to click between the different artworks and load different pages was just, we knew from experience that sometimes people were visiting some of the online shows and they weren't navigating the whole show. They were seeing the first page, maybe clicking one thing and moving to another page, but not getting to the third or fourth or fifth page. And so by using like the desktop style, they kind of hopefully would be, oh yeah, each of these things operates and does something, therefore that may be the interface that leads to all the artworks. I think that issue of network, net art projects and online spaces is kind of a little bit resistant, is baked into the history of them. Like a lot of the projects were probably hard to work with at first when they were, you know, functioning totally in the way that they were meant to do, because you needed to break away from the prescribed way of acting with an interface and recognize that it was behaving slightly differently and against expectations in quite a lot of those works, which means that, you know, the number of people who kind of saw the whole piece was probably pretty small for some pieces, or experienced it totally in the way it was expected. So I don't think that's a problem, that people are having kind of partial experiences of a work, or not getting every nuance, or, you know, in the transmedia works that exist in multiple spaces, maybe only seeing a portion of the entire project. You know, if you go to a museum now and you see a video work, you're unlikely to watch the whole thing if it's a large work, and there's often a problem with having to put multiple films on one reel, so the problem exists elsewhere. But as it comes back to like teaching students about the projects, that itself is a massive problem, because it's not just about whether or not the work is functioning, and you can kind of take them to that space and show them this is how it performs, this is how it is engaged with. You know, of course, there's a lot of conservators out there in the new media sphere who are doing really incredible work. There's a whole podcast, Art and Obsolescence, documenting those journeys and struggles. But part of the problem is also kind of like helping students recognize the value of what was really impressive coding at the time, because they're growing up in a space where the advances in coding and what those spaces are like have like skyrocketed. So how do you translate what was unique in the properties and experience of an early net art to people who are growing up with like a massive amount of internet and hugely complex experiences already? It's not dissimilar to the issue of performance art. Like, how do you convey why that thing was so seminal and valuable, but the art historical canon does better with those types of practices, mainly because it's written about more and it's exhibited more and it's talked about more. So I think to a certain extent, it's the only solution we have is raising the profile of the entire genre and mediums, but we can't do that as teachers alone.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your generous answers too. Unless there's like pressure in last question, I think that we are okay to maybe wrap it up here. You've done an amazing effort to like sum up all your practice throughout these last 5 years in like 45 minutes or 50 or like the short time that you used today. I think it was great to hear from your work, and also to hear you reply to these questions.
Maybe just one more question for me,
Sure.
which is more a curiosity. Maybe you guys want to share about the future of Offsite project, or if there's some upcoming ideas or projects that you're working on, or anything that you want to share.
Yeah, I think we want to do more hybrid events. Like we did that with some projects in 2020. Well, actually, like funnily, 2020 it was a year where we were like planning to do more physical shows, or like shows that were like perceived also in a physical space. So that's where we're moving a little bit towards. and also working on the community that is around us, because in the last 5 years we have been very lucky to work with artists from all around the world and with different backgrounds and ways of thinking and perspective. So we want to kind of go back to that and look for a way to document that or highlight that, and then just continue creating a platform for these artists.
Yeah, I mean, I'll totally echo what Peter is saying, and just if you look at the rate of projects that were happening in 2017, 2018, 2019, we were doing zip shows once a month at one point, then down to once every 2 months, once every 3 months, and we haven't actually done a zip show in almost a year. So we are sort of moving to this thing of more hybrid projects that exist across multiple spaces, like Leah's, like the Terminal with Jason and everyone else involved in that, where they exist in 2, 3, maybe 4 spaces, locations that are online, spread out through social media and in physical locales simultaneously. But taking on those projects takes a lot more time. So the rate of projects is liably going to be smaller. At the same time, we're probably going to be writing and researching more. So we do kind of publish semi-regularly on issues around online art, recently writing about mapping and things. So mapping of online galleries and how that can take place. So yeah, and I think a continuation of what we did with the I Am Surrounded by Me show, which is trying to link contemporary practice back to the art historical canon and kind of find ways to bridge it together as a way to promote it and relate it to everything else that's happening, hopefully.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And I think for anyone interested, they can subscribe to, you have a newsletter, right? So you can go on offsiteproject.org and know more about these future hybrid events. And for us, John, we're back in 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's right. We'll be back on the 14th of December with Anna Riedler on the last Screen Walk of the season. So please join us. And yeah, again, thank you so much, Pete and Elliot.